Calaroga Shark Media. Hello and welcome to Murder Weekly. This episode is titled Rewind to Murder.
(2002), New York City. The flickering neon sign of Video Oasis cast an eerie glow on the lifeless body of the young store clerk. Her once vibrant eyes now staring blankly at the rows of VHS tapes she would never rewind again. Detective Jack Sip Malloy stepped over the shattered remains of a tape, its black ribbon spilling out like blood from a wound. The sight before him was enough to turn even the most seasoned cop's stomach. "What a goddamn mess," Sip growled, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "Who's the poor broad?" "Maggie Larson, 22, a film student working part-time," Officer Ramirez replied, flipping through his notepad. "Found by the manager this morning, with a broken VHS tape shoved in her mouth." Maggie Larson, once a bright-eyed film student with dreams of making it big in Hollywood, now lay in a pool of her own blood, her face frozen in a grotesque expression of terror. But it was the VHS tape protruding from her mouth that made Sip's blood run cold. The jagged edges of the plastic casing had been forcefully shoved down her throat, tearing through the soft tissue and leaving a gaping wound. Blood and saliva mingled with the tangled remains of the tape's innards, creating a macabre sight that would haunt Sip's nightmares for years to come. "Jesus Christ," Ramirez muttered, his face turning a sickly shade of green as he fought back the urge to vomit. "What kind of sick bastard does something like this?" Sip crouched down, his eyes narrowing as he studied the gruesome details. The killer had taken their time, savoring every moment of Maggie's suffering. The multiple lacerations on her body told a story of a slow, agonizing death, each cut precisely placed to maximize pain and terror. "This wasn't just a murder," Sip growled, his voice barely above a whisper. "This was a freaking work of art to the twisted bastard who did this." He reached out with a gloved hand, carefully extracting the blood-soaked tape from Maggie's mouth. The title on the label was barely legible, the ink smeared by the viscous fluids. "American Psycho 2, Sip read, his jaw clenching. "Looks like our killer has a sick sense of humor." As he stood up, Sip's eyes drifted to the rows of VHS tapes lining the shelves, their colorful spines now seeming to mock him with their false promises of escapism and entertainment. He knew that somewhere among those titles lay the key to unlocking the depraved mind of the killer, a breadcrumb trail of cinematic violence leading to a real-life horror show. "Bag everything," Sip barked at the crime scene techs, his voice cutting through the eerie stillness of the video store. "I want every goddamn tape in this place cataloged and analyzed. Our killer's been studying, and it's time we learned what makes them tick." Sip crouched down, examining the jagged edges of the tape. "American Psycho 2, he read, his brow furrowing. Guess someone took their movie a little too seriously. As the crime scene techs bagged the evidence, Sip turned his attention to the store's video rental records. One name kept popping up, a regular customer with a disturbing taste in films. "Donnie Russo," Sip muttered, scanning the titles. "Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. The Last House on the Left, Man Bites Dog." Jesus, it's like a serial killer's greatest hits. Sip and Ramirez navigated the dimly lit hallway of the run-down apartment building, the stench of cigarette smoke and desperation clinging to the walls like a cheap perfume. They reached apartment 3B, the peeling paint on the door a testament to the decay that lay within. Sip pounded on the door, his fist leaving a dent in the flimsy wood. "Donnie Russo, open up, NYPD homicide!" There was a shuffling sound from inside, followed by the clink of empty beer bottles and the creak of a couch. The door swung open, revealing a disheveled man with bloodshot eyes and a week's worth of stubble. Donnie Russo, the prime suspect in the brutal murder of Maggie Larson, stood before them in stained underwear and a sweat-soaked undershirt. "What the hell do you want?" Donnie slurred, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey and stale cigarettes. Sip flashed his badge, his steely gaze locking onto Donnie's watery eyes. "Detective Malloy, homicide. This is Ramirez. We'd like to have a little chat about your taste in movies and how it might relate to the dead girl at the video store." Donnie's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face before he managed to regain his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about, man. I just rent movies, that's all." Sip took a step forward, his imposing frame filling the doorway. "Yeah, well, the thing is, Donnie, the movies you've been renting paint a pretty disturbing picture. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, Man Bites Dog, American Psycho. It's like a serial killer starter kit." Donnie backed away, his hands trembling as he stumbled over the scattered debris of his apartment. "That's just a coincidence, man. I like horror movies, that's all. It doesn't mean I killed anyone." Ramirez stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Then you won't mind if we take a look around, will you, Donnie? If you've got nothing to hide, this should be a breeze." Sip and Ramirez pushed past Donnie, their eyes scanning the cluttered apartment for any signs of the killer's handiwork. The walls were lined with horror movie posters, the faces of iconic slashers leering down at them like a twisted gallery of death. The TV flickered in the corner, a paused image of a blood-soaked murder scene casting an eerie glow over the room. As Sip rummaged through the piles of VHS tapes, his eyes landed on a familiar title. "American Psycho," he muttered, holding up the tape. "Funny, we found the sequel shoved down Maggie Larson's throat. Care to explain that, Donnie?" Donnie's face drained of color, his eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for an escape. I don't know how that got there. Someone must have planted it, I swear." Sip's patience was wearing thin, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Cut the crap, Donnie. We've got your rental history and it reads like a freaking murder manual. Start talking or I swear to God I'll make sure you never see another movie again." Donnie looked up, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "You see, I've been studying the art of murder, learning from the best, and now it's time for my directorial debut." Sip's eyes widened as Donnie reached for a hidden knife, lunging at the detective with a maniacal laugh. Sip reacted on instinct, his gun drawn and fired in one fluid motion. Donnie crumpled to the ground, his final act cut short. As the smoke cleared, Sip stared at the scattered VHS tapes, their titles now a chilling epitaph. "Manhunter, Copycat, Natural-Born Killers," he read, his voice laced with disgust. The only thing this sick bastard was a natural-born killer of was innocent kids' dreams. Sip kicked aside a tape, its label reading, "The Silence of the Lambs." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Guess we won't be needing Hannibal Lecter's help on this one, Ramirez. The sick son of a bitch practically gift-wrapped himself for us." As the duo left the apartment, the neon sign of Video Oasis flickered in the distance, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked behind the silver screen. Detective Jack Sip Malloy knew that in a world where reality and fiction blurred, it was his job to ensure that justice always got the final cut.
Murder Weekly is a Calaroga Shark Media production, written and hosted by Aidan I. Flanagan, produced by Mark Francis, executive producers Mark Francis and John McDermott. Portions of this podcast may have been created with the assistance of AI. Calaroga Shark Media.